Unthinkable. Did Karen Read really kill her husband? Things are getting busy in the second trial of Karen Read. Did she kill her husband or did someone else do the killing? We're going to update you on the case with a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. It is what some are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charlie Crimebuster, CharlieCrimebuster.com, and PeacemakerNetwork.com are copyrights owned by Charlie Crimebuster. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to another Charlie Crimebuster podcast. Glad to have you on the Charlie train today. Hey, get a few housekeeping chores out of the way if you don't mind. I'd like to encourage you to reach out with a shout out. We love to hear from new listeners and seasoned listeners. You can reach me, CharlieCrimebuster at gmail.com, CharlieCrimebuster@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the program and read about our sponsor, you can go to PeacemakerNetwork.com. There you're going to read about the brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. We are talking about law enforcement, first responders, and those brave men and women of the military. Read all about that. Become a part of it. Become a badge, BADGE supporter. Join the team. That would be great. Just let me encourage you to take a look at it at PeacemakerNetwork.com. Then if you'd like to get caught up on all of the episodes, James Buckland says it's binge casting. If you'd like to do some binge casting, then just go to CharlieCrimebuster.com. Over 200 episodes there. And we have a few more episodes on the very subject we're talking about today. Karen Read. Hey, that trial is coming up just around the corner. In April, they're going to start but they're going to start selecting the jury. That's right. Starting it this coming April, right in the first week of April. And as I said, there is breaking news in that story. So again, let me recap. If you would like to find more episodes about Karen Read, go to CharlieCrimebuster.com. If you'd like to read about how the Peacemaker Network sponsors us, go to PeacemakerNetwork.com. And of course, if you'd like to reach me, Charlie Crimebuster, you can make suggestions about episodes you'd like for us to cover. You can ask questions about episodes we have covered. You can even lodge objections and disagree. We always say it is a safe zone. Reach me, Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. All right, let's get right into our focus. It was indeed the early morning hours of January the 29th, 2022. That's when Boston Police Department officer John O'Keefe was found dead outside the then home of Boston police officer Brian Albert. That's up in Canton, Massachusetts. You see, O'Keefe had been dropped off the night before by his girlfriend, Karen Read. You hear a lot about Karen Read in these episodes. Well, he was dropped off by Karen Read to join a party that was hosted by Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe. But they discovered him the next morning, lying in the snow. And there he was transported to a local hospital, where then he died, and the cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma and hypothermia. 3 days later, Karen Read was arrested, charged with manslaughter. Eventually was charged with motor vehicle homicide and leaving the scene of a deadly crash. You see, the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, they alleged that Read had hit O'Keefe with her SUV and had left the scene. So she pleaded guilty to the earlier charges, but then, surprise, 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 4 months later she was arrested again because on June the 9th, 2022, she was indicted by a grand jury, this time for second-degree murder and motor vehicle manslaughter while, listen to this, driving under the influence and leaving the scene of a deadly crash. So immediately these charges, which was bad in the first part, became much, much worse when they went for second-degree murder, motor vehicle manslaughter, while driving under the influence. In fact, those charges, my friend, it could actually put her behind bars for life. So Reed again pleads not guilty. Her defense attorney, David Yannetti, he had actually accused the Massachusetts State Police of manufacturing evidence in the investigation. He also alleged that the lead investigator, Trooper Michael Proctor, had a conflict of interest due to the fact that his family had a relationship with some of the prosecution's witnesses, and even some of those that are alleged to be blamed by the defense for this terrible death. So Reed went to trial. We covered that real time. Her first trial came to an end on July the 1st when a jury of 6 women and 6 men, well, they said repeatedly, they just said, we cannot come up with a verdict. They were hopelessly deadlocked. And then the judge declared a mistrial. Now, my friend, as we thought about that and talked about that, I should let you know the lead prosecutor of this case, Michael Proctor, well, he's been in deep trouble, on the hot seat, because, again, of his connections with the Alberts and because he sent some texts to others about Karen Read, said some really nasty things about her, said he hoped that Karen Read had committed or would commit suicide. So here we have a trial. It's deadlocked. And now the prosecution is going after her again. And this trial is to begin in just a few weeks from now, a couple of weeks from now, if you're listening to this in real time. Now, there has been a whole lot going on, particularly this week, preceding this trial. And the judge, who was asked for a delay in the trial, said, no, we're not going to do it. Now, it's understandable to me that you had said that. The attorneys had plenty of time to look over the evidence in light of such evidence that was revealed at the first trial. But there's some other reasons, hang on to that, there's some other reasons they are asking for a delay. And we're going to tell you all about those things that have been happening and getting ready for this trial in just a moment. But now it's time for us to take time on the podcast to share our weekly Crazy Crook of the Week. Now, our Crazy Crook story today, well, there's just something normal. And this is something that is normal and becomes crazy before our very eyes. It is a normal occurrence, and I think you agree with me, that sometimes when we have photos taken of ourselves, we just may not like the one that was taken. And we might urge the person to take another photo in place of that one. Or if you're doing a selfie, don't like that one, going to do it again. I want a better photo out there. It is called a do-over, right? Well, in golf, they call it a mulligan. A do-over. And oftentimes, when our picture is taken, we want a do-over. And that is pretty normal. But let me tell you when it's not normal. And let me tell you when it becomes crazy. You see, there was a man that was suspected of arson and vandalism. His name, Donald Chip Pugh. Donald Chip Pugh, they called him Chip. In Ohio. And he was indeed suspected of arson and vandalism. But he had a problem. He had a problem. And he sent a selfie of himself to the police in Ohio because he found that the photo on his arrest warrant that they were, of course, publishing, he thought it was unflattering, didn't like it. So Donald Chip Pugh, he texts police a photo of himself, and he wrote, "Here is a better photo. That one is terrible." Even told a radio station, man, they just did me wrong. They put a picture out that made me look like I was a Thundercat, or James Brown on the run. Said, I can't do that. So he actually sent the police a selfie. Now, the Lemon Police Department, they had a pretty good idea or a pretty good attitude about it. They responded and said, we want to thank him for being helpful. But now, we would appreciate it if he would just come and speak to us. Now, you would think if a man is crazy enough to draw attention to himself while on the run, that's something you don't do. When you're on the run, you don't usually draw attention to yourself. He said, no, the picture you're putting out there really doesn't look like me. Let me give you a picture that looks more like me. That's what he did. You think maybe if he did that, he was crazy enough to come in and speak to police. However, he didn't do that. But with this help of giving him a better picture, they did trace him to Florida. And down here in the Sunshine State, they found him, arrested him. He ended up in the slammer. So this crazy crook, who did not like the photo of his arrest warrant, decided to text and send the police a better picture while he was on the run. This man indeed is Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Wow, folks, you really can't make this up, as we say every week. So now let's get back to our focus. Now, you may have wanted to know what did happen to Michael Proctor. He was that lead investigator that got in trouble. Well, the state police, they did issue another statement just lately, Wednesday. Said both the State Police Association of Massachusetts and the MSP Union and Proctor's attorney says that the statements in the decision that the police made will be appealed. So keep in mind, they're going to appeal this. But, you see, Reed's first trial, it did result in a hung jury and a mistrial. That was in July of 2024, not long ago. Proctor at that point was relieved of his duty. He was suspended and he was subject to a trial board investigation. That was because of the accusations of inappropriate conduct. So the trial board, they included statement reports that Proctor had been accused of, and in several fractions. Charge number 1, Proctor was found guilty by this board, by this police trial board. He was found guilty of sending derogatory, defamatory, disparaging, and otherwise statements inappropriate about a suspect in that investigation to other individuals. Guilty. Now, this, by the way, occurred on various dates between January 29 and August 17, 2022. And Proctor admitted to the Reed jury that he had called the defendant a quote-unquote whack job in text messages to fellow troopers, friends, and family. 1 week later, July the 8th, well, Mr. Proctor, guess what? He was suspended without pay. Also, in charge 1, Proctor was also found guilty of sharing sensitive or confidential information about a person involved in a homicide with non-law enforcement personnel. That's a no-no. Again, the trial board, the document says that those infractions occurred between January 29 and June 9, 2022. And the final thing in charge 1 that they found him guilty was creating an image that he was biased in his dealings with a homicide suspect. Now, that document also states that Proctor, quote-unquote, brought otherwise himself and the Massachusetts State Police into disrepute. It's not over. Charge 2 found Proctor guilty of consuming alcohol while on duty on July the 19th, 2022. That came out in testimony. He was accused of drinking alcoholic beverages with dinner while on duty and then driving a MSP police cruiser. So, Colonel Jeffrey Noble of the Massachusetts State Police said in his own statement, "As superintendent, my role demands I do what is in the best interest of the department. My decision to terminate Mr. Proctor." See, he not only was suspended, now he's terminated. And he went on to say, Colonel Noble did, that it follows a thorough, fair, and impartial process. He said, "I weighed the nature of the offenses, the impact upon our investigative integrity, and the importance of safeguarding the reputation of our dedicated men and women of the state police. And so I have fired him." Well, Proctor's friends and support people are not going to let that stand. They're going to try to get that turned over. Brian Williams, president of the State Police Association, he released a statement, and here's what he said. He says the department's decision to sacrifice Trooper Proctor to appease the media rather than making a decision on facts and evidence presented in the trial board is disappointing, but not surprising. Calling the trial board process flawed? They said, well, that's an understatement. Now, they went on to say members are human, and humans make mistakes. Mistakes have consequences. And they say that the inappropriate language he used was not right and not good. However, they think that him being terminated is quote unquote excessive. So if you've been following along with us and you've been following this case, what do you think? Do you think it was fair to fire Investigator Proctor? Or was it overboard? Was Michael Proctor the so-called quote unquote sacrificial lamb to a blotched investigation? Or was his behavior to the point that he should and was terminated? Now, you might ask, what does this have to do with the outcome of the case? Well, plenty, really plenty. You see, it took the focus off the real evidence of the case and actually brought into focus that this evidence might be tainted evidence. You see, the inference of Proctor and others now may have planted so-called evidence. You and I, well, as far as I'm concerned, in looking at the case, the most damaging piece of evidence in that first trial was pieces of the taillight that they said allegedly was found on old Keef's clothes, found at a later time. That would connect his death to the impact of a vehicle instead of being beat up in a home. But if people thought that Proctor was corrupt, and there's a fine line between being inappropriate and corruption, by the way, but if they thought he was corrupt, that could indeed impact the finding of the pieces of taillight that was connected to the vehicle. Proctor had access to the vehicle. Proctor had access to John's body. Now, the defense, they allege that taillight was busted after John O'Keefe had died, after he was let out at that residence. And if that is the case, then you could conclude, somebody could, that maybe the residue of the taillight could have been planted. So it is really a big deal that Proctor goofed up. Now, I know he was inappropriate, but was he corrupt? That's what you have to think. Hey, what do you think? We'd love to hear from you. Reach out with that shout out. Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. Charlie Crimebuster at gmail.com. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself with this new trial, but that is from the last one. What else has happened? Well, you see, the day after John's death in January 2022, we now know from what has happened in some other documentaries and Karen speaking out since the trial, we know that was when Karen and her father, William Reed, went over to John's family to see the family, you see. While at the home, Karen asked John's brother, Paul O'Keefe, what John looked like when they identified his body. And here's what he said. He said, my brother looked like he went 5 rounds with Tyson. That's what Karen remembered Paul telling her. And then his mother leans over the kitchen aisle and says, to me, it looks like he got hit by a car. Looks like he got hit by a car. And Karen thinks, well, wait a minute. Were you both looking at the same body? You know, that really brings down this case to what it is. I mean, that's the real question, isn't it? Was he beaten up by somebody in that house and left in the snow face up? Or was he hit by an automobile? Now, we do know that the first trial ended up in a hung jury. But even that's questionable. Because in that jury, according to those folks that were in the jury found that 2 of those charges they were going to vote not guilty on. It was the 3rd charge that they were hung up on. So now we're getting ready to go to trial. And the breaking news is this. The defense said, we want a delay. We want a delay. Commonly you hear that in trials. But the judge says, nope, not going to do it. You see, one of the reasons for that delay was that the defense is waiting for ruling from the First Circuit Court of Appeals. In that court, Reed's lawyers are trying to get 2 of the 3 charges against her dropped because they said jurors had made a unanimous decision to acquit her on those 2 charges. Those charges are the most serious: second-degree murder, leaving the scene of a crash causing injury or death. Now, a federal judge had rejected that request, so then Reed's team appealed to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. They have not heard back from that, so they're saying, can we have a delay and let's wait? And defense attorney Alan Jackson said the result of that appeal would have an impact upon the jury and their trial strategy. But shortly after that hearing, just this past week, the judge informed the court of her decision to deny that request to delay the start of the retrial. You see, the jury selection is supposed to start on April the 1st. And in her decision to deny, she expressed concern about getting this large jury pool. She said, I'm not going to grant the motion. We have jurors coming in that we summoned months ago. Said she even called the jury commissioner and said how long would it take to get those right numbers that we're able to get on April the 1st. And she said, well, they said a minimum of 10 weeks. She said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to wait 10 weeks for us to get a jury together. We got a jury coming together on the 1st, and we got to start working on jury selection. But she did put a caveat out there. She said, if the jury is in place by April the 25th, and if the Federal Appeals Court has not issued a ruling on the defense's request to drop the 2 charges against Reed, she might revisit that request to delay. So judge said, I'm not going to delay. Hopefully while we're getting this jury, we'll hear from the First Circuit Court of Appeals about whether they're going to drop those 2 charges or not. If we don't and we're ready to go with the 25th, I will then consider maybe a short delay while we're waiting on that appeal. Now there's another thing that's happened this week in these pretrial hearings that we've been talking about. Attorney David Yannetti told the judge that just like in the first trial, they plan to mount a third-party culprit defense. They were indeed going to argue that the 3 men that could be responsible for O'Keefe's death, instead of Reed, it was Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, or Colin Albert. Now, Brian Albert is a retired Boston police officer. He owned that Canton home where O'Keefe's body was found in the snow. In the first trial, the defense attorneys claimed that John O'Keefe could have been dragged outside after he was killed during a fight inside the home. And so they're going to, use that Saudi. You've heard of that Saudi defense, right? Some other dude did it. Now, Colin Albert, the other person that they might try to put in that place, is Brian Albert's nephew. He was a teenager at the time that O'Keefe died, and he was drinking inside the home the night that the body was found in the snow. Now, it was also revealed during the first trial, the other guy was Brian Higgins. He's a ATF agent. He was out drinking with a group that included O'Keefe and Brian Albert, and we now know that he had previously exchanged flirty text messages with Karen Read, John's girlfriend. So they're thinking there's a motive there. You see, the prosecution, though, they said, we don't want you to bring this third-party stuff into it. That's way off subject, is what they're trying to say. And there was a discussion made about that in a sidebar over that issue. But the judge did not make a ruling at that time. Then, of course, it brings us back to the fact that just Wednesday, during this whole time, Michael Proctor was fired by the Massachusetts State Police. You see, the prosecution had previously filed a motion to prohibit reference of any pending internal affairs investigations. We don't want that brought into the trial, and so they're filing a motion that we don't talk about Michael Proctor and that internal affairs investigation. We don't think that has anything to do with the case. And Brennan then said that he needed more time on arguing that motion since Proctor had just been fired and the state had been provided with the internal affair documents, but they haven't yet had a chance to review them. So the judge gave all the attorneys till March the 28th, that's coming up Friday, to go through the documents, mark anything that's disputed, that they feel should be excluded, and then, of course, they will then move forward. The defense will let the judge know by April the 1st how much time they need to form their rebuttal, all about that. Now, there's something else that happened, too. Remember I told you about a guy by the name of Turtle Boy? Yeah, old Turtle Boy. Remember Turtle Boy? Well, they're trying now. The prosecution is trying to get the text between Turtle Boy, Canary, and Karen Read, trying to get those texts to be able to introduce them in trial and use that as part of their prosecution. Now, if you want to know what really took this case to a national exposure, it was the work of Turtle Boy. He had a blog and he has a podcast, and he's the one who first began to talk about police corruption and that something wasn't right in this case. And the biggest thing that really took his attention was the fact that the prosecution, in their own digital expert, found a text from someone in that house, and that particular person in that house had actually Googled how long does it take a body to die in the cold. Now here's the real clicker. According to the defense, that text was made 3.5 hours before they found his body that morning. That's a whole new thing. Now, there's all kinds of back and forth about that, and we did cover that in the podcasts that we have published about this case. And if you're not up on it, go back and listen. They're really, really, really good stuff. And so, back in the courtroom on Thursday, less than 2 weeks before jury selection is to begin, they tried to use the messages between Read and Turtle Boy, and they wanted to get those put in the trial. The judge denied the defense attorneys to delay that to start the trial, of course. And then, so they had another hearing about trying to get these text messages in from Karen and Turtle Boy. You see, Read says she's being framed as a part of cover-up by several people, including law enforcement. And, of course, she pled no guilty. Now, Thursday's hearing was helping to set the ground rules for the upcoming trial. So there's a lot of things going on here, folks, as you can see, Lots of things going on. And a lot of things that are now arguing about this trial. And the 28th, we're going to hear some more from the judge about what's happening in that trial. I can tell you for one thing, folks, it is going to be one humdinger of a trial. Karen Read's attorneys also added to the witness list other people. They even want to call more people than they had before, you see. And then there was that debate over the RCCA witnesses. You remember this was this special group of guys who came, and they, of course, are people who reconstruct automobile accidents. Very, very astute people, very smart people, very qualified people, and they really, even though they were supposed to be independent, their testimony really bolstered the defense of Karen Read. And it has since come out that they say that the DA, the district attorney's office, had hired these people to do this study. And it was presented at the trial that this was an independent study, that this didn't have anything to do with the prosecution. However, we do know now that the district attorney's office was a part of the group of people that had actually hired these attorneys and the defense attorneys. And so there's all kinds of back and forth about that. Who hired them, all that sort of thing. And so, of course, the prosecution is trying to get these guys out of the trial whatsoever. The prosecution does not want these experts to testify. But I think they will. So I'm saying all of this in this particular episode to tell you that it is unthinkable. It's unthinkable in two ways. Number one, this case is unthinkable because right now Karen is being charged as though she ran over her boyfriend with intent, that she did it on purpose, that it wasn't an accident, that she literally murdered him by car. That's unthinkable to me that she would do that to her boyfriend. On the other hand, there are other people that believe that he went into that home that night and somebody in that home beat him up to the point that he died. Maybe he hit his head when he fell back and was in a fight, and that they brought him out and laid him in the snow face up. So that too is unthinkable. Don't you agree? It's unthinkable either way. Whether Karen Read did it by running over him or whether somebody in that house did it. It's just unthinkable. It is going to be a humdinger of a trial, and we're going to keep you up on it. What about you? What do you think happened? What do you think really happened to John O'Keefe? Was he killed by Karen with a car, or was he killed inside that house? And if he was killed inside that house, it points to a police cover-up. Was there a police cover-up in this case? Love to hear your opinion. You can reach me again, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Reach out with that shout out. We'd love to hear from you. And we're going to be talking about this particular podcast we've done today on our YouTube channel. So catch that right around the corner, if you would, please. Now, what's your thoughts about this coming big trial? Let me know. Reach out with shout out, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Till this time, next time, Charlie Crimebuster here, reminding you, be safe, be alert. Yep, the life you save might be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.